In a small-town diner, silence was the rule, and fear passed for authority. One mistake, one stay, one man who refused to raise his voice. Because real strength doesn't explode. It waits. And when the line is crossed, everything changes. The sharp sound echoed through the small roadside diner, freezing every movement for a split second. A cup tipped, coffee spilled, and the room fell into an uneasy silence where no one dared to react. In a quiet corner sat Evan Cole, a former Navy special operator, calm and unreadable, with his highly trained K-9 resting silently at his feet. Years of authority had taught the uniformed man at the counter that fear kept people obedient, that no one would challenge him in a town like this. But that belief was built on fragile ground. Outside, late autumn wrapped the western foothills in cold air and pale light, the kind that stripped places down to their truth. The diner itself was worn and modest, warmed more by habit than comfort, a place where people spoke softly to avoid attention. Evan had arrived without spectacle, choosing his seat carefully, observing without being seen, his presence controlled and deliberate. Around him, workers kept their eyes low, not out of shame, but survival. Behind the counter, Clara Hayes moved with practiced restraint, her politeness a shield shaped by years of learning when silence was safer than protest. When a simple accident drew unwanted attention, the tension in the room thickened, exposing the quiet imbalance of power everyone had learned to accept. Yet what no one realized was that restraint is not weakness, and silence does not mean submission. Some limits, once crossed, awaken consequences, not driven by anger, but by discipline, control, and the precise moment when intervention becomes unavoidable. She didn't cry. She paused, steadying herself, as if refusing to let the moment define her. The man standing over her, now called Ronan Hale, filled the room with an uncomfortable authority, speaking loudly not to inform, but to intimidate, using vague words meant to shrink anyone who heard them. No one intervened. People looked away, calculating the cost of speaking up. Elena Moore, who had learned long ago that silence sometimes bought survival, apologized for something that was never her fault and returned to her work with quiet strength. From a corner booth, David Carter observed everything without reacting, his calm more unsettling than anger. Beneath the table, his trained dog remained perfectly still, alert but controlled, a silent reminder that discipline is stronger than aggression. The room held its breath as power tried to assert itself through fear, mistaking restraint for weakness. When David finally stood to leave, he paid not only his meal but what had been ignored before, a small act of accountability that shifted something unseen in the room. He left behind nothing but a folded note with a number, no explanation, no promise. At the door, Ronan tried once more to block his path, using posture instead of words, authority instead of reason. David answered calmly, without challenge or submission, and chose to walk away. In that moment, everyone understood that real strength doesn't raise its voice. It remembers, it waits, and it never forgets. Pride slowly twisted into something colder and more reckless, shaped by years of believing that no one in this town would ever question him. He stepped closer, invading Alex Carter's space, making sure the silent crowd was watching, as if the moment itself needed witnesses. What followed was sudden and shocking, not graphic, but undeniable, and the room froze as the tension crossed from quiet intimidation into something openly unacceptable. Alex stayed calm, grounded by discipline rather than fear. While beneath the table his trained dog reacted instinctively, only to stop instantly at a single, controlled command. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with realization. What had just happened could no longer be dismissed or ignored. As authority was misused and the situation escalated, Alex chose compliance over chaos, trusting that restraint would speak louder than resistance. The onlookers, Emma behind the counter, Thomas near the window, and young Officer Ryan watching helplessly, each understood in their own way that a line had been crossed. When Alex was taken away, the town didn't erupt. It absorbed the moment quietly, the way small towns do, letting it settle into memory and conscience. Behind closed doors, doubt grew. Courage took shape. and hidden evidence resurfaced. Because while silence can protect injustice for a time, truth has weight, and eventually, it forces everything to shift. She was in her early 40s, tall and composed, with strands of gray woven naturally through her dark hair, always tied back in a practical way. Her posture reflected years of responsibility and quiet strength. For decades, she had worked as a school administrator, knowing every family story worth knowing. Life had taught her that kindness only survives when it has limits. She paused when she noticed the dog. Calm, focused, alert, not frightened, not aggressive. Something about that discipline softened her expression. "Good boy," she whispered, instinctively keeping her distance, understanding that this animal was not meant for strangers. 2 nights later, the cell door opened. The officer spoke with rehearsed indifference. "You're free. No charges." The words sounded less like justice and more like dismissal. The message was clear without being spoken aloud. Outside, the cold air felt honest. The dog reacted instantly when his handler appeared, pulling forward before stopping himself. One calm hand on his neck was enough. "Easy," the man murmured. The tension eased, but readiness remained, because vigilance was part of who they were. That morning, he didn't return to the cafe. Instead, he made quiet phone calls, careful, factual, unemotional. He contacted people who understood procedure and timing, people who listened when systems failed. No accusations, no drama, just truth, placed where it belonged. And slowly, the town felt it. Conversations shifted. Fear turned into purpose. Silence cracked, not loudly, but permanently. When federal inspectors finally arrived, there were no crowds, no spectacle. Justice didn't announce itself. It simply moved forward, steady and unavoidable. Authority changed hands without shouting. Power faded once it lost its title. Witnesses spoke, not as heroes, but as people choosing honesty over fear. Relief didn't come as celebration, but as breath, the kind you didn't realize you were holding. The cafe reopened the same day. Coffee brewed. The bell chimed. Yet everything felt different. People stood a little straighter. They spoke with intention. Awareness replaced denial. That evening, the man returned briefly, staying outside. Across the street, a young woman met his eyes and placed her hand over her heart. A quiet thank you, deeper than words. He nodded once. That was enough. He left without applause, without recognition, disappearing into falling snow. This story reminds us that justice doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes, it moves quietly, through patience, truth, and restraint. Not through force, not through anger, but through courage chosen in silence. In our own lives, we face moments like this more often than we realize. Moments where doing the right thing feels risky, where silence feels safer. Yet truth has weight. Integrity leaves marks. If this story touched you, remember, quiet courage still matters. Even unseen choices can change everything. Weeks passed, but the town never truly returned to what it had been. On the surface, everything looked familiar. The diner's windows still caught the morning sun. The bell above the door still chimed with the same tired optimism. Trucks still rolled through before dawn, and farmers still drank their coffee too fast, standing instead of sitting, as if rest was something to be earned elsewhere. Yet beneath the routine, something fundamental had shifted. People noticed things now. They noticed how authority spoke, how it lingered too long, how it demanded rather than served. And once noticed, those things could no longer be unseen. Clara Hayes no longer apologized automatically. The habit had been worn into her over years, a reflex shaped by survival. But habits, once questioned, begin to weaken. When customers spilled their drinks now, she smiled and said, "It happens," and meant it. Her voice carried weight, not volume, but certainty. Elena Moore, who had once lowered her eyes, now met them. Not defiantly, just honestly. She learned that strength didn't require confrontation, only presence. And presence, once reclaimed, became contagious. Behind closed doors, people began talking. Not gossip, not rumor, truth. Old stories resurfaced, small injustices once dismissed as misunderstandings, patterns once rationalized as coincidence. A traffic stop that never made sense. A warning delivered with a smike. A report that vanished into a drawer and never came back out. Individually, none of it had seemed enough. Together, it was undeniable. David, no, Evan, as some had known him before the town learned to look more closely, kept his distance. That had always been his way. Intervention without occupation. Influence without ownership. He understood something most didn't. Real change fails when it needs a hero to sustain it. The phone calls he made were precise. Dates, times, names, documentation. He spoke like a man assembling a structure that could stand on its own once he walked away. No embellishment, no emotion. Facts arranged with care. Those on the other end recognized the tone immediately. It was the sound of someone who had nothing to gain, and therefore everything to be trusted. The dog, his constant shadow, remained the same. Disciplined, observant, alive with intelligence restrained by training. To those who noticed, the animal became a symbol in itself. Power under control, capability guided by judgment. Children began asking questions. Why had things changed? Why did people seem braver? Why did adults pause before answering now, choosing their words more carefully? Parents struggled with the answers because the truth was uncomfortable. Fear had once been easier than courage. Silence had once felt safer than honesty. But children have a way of sensing when something matters. At the school, the administrator, the woman with gray threaded through dark hair, stood in front of an assembly and spoke not of rules, but of responsibility. Not of obedience, but of ethics. She didn't mention names. She didn't reference events. She spoke about boundaries, about respect, about the quiet strength of doing what is right even when no one is watching. The room listened. Some of the students understood immediately. Others would understand later, when memory caught up with experience. Ronan Hale's name stopped being spoken aloud, not because he had been erased, but because he had been understood. Power without integrity collapses once exposed. Titles protect only as long as belief supports them. When he left town, there was no farewell, no confrontation, no satisfaction, just absence. And absence, in this case, felt like relief. The inspectors finished their work and moved on, as they always do. Systems corrected themselves slowly, imperfectly, but undeniably. New faces took positions. New policies were written. Transparency replaced tradition. Not everyone welcomed it. Change rarely feels kind to those who benefited from the old way. But the town held. Quietly. Collectively. Months later, snow returned, softer this time. It settled on rooftops and fences, muting sound, encouraging reflection. The diner stayed warm, filled with conversation that no longer felt cautious. One evening, a stranger sat near the window, watching the street. He stayed only long enough to drink his coffee and leave exact change on the table. Some recognized him. Most didn't. That was fine. Across the room, Clara caught Elena's eye. They shared a look, not gratitude, not pride, but understanding. The kind earned, not given. Outside, the man paused once, feeling the cold air bite his lungs. The dog waited, poised, watching the world with steady focus. Nothing dramatic happened, and that was the point. Because justice, when done right, doesn't demand memory. It allows life to move forward without fear. It leaves behind not stories of violence, but patterns of courage. The man walked on, footsteps fading into the quiet street, carrying nothing with him except the knowledge that restraint, when chosen with intention, can outlast force. And somewhere behind him, a town continued living, not louder, not bolder, but more awake than it had ever been.